Hey everyone, it's Brian Hornby here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel here, and I guess another week's gone by, and let's just talk more about ideas that we're hearing or speculation on the NHL here, the National Hockey League, on their plans to relaunch and hopefully maybe conclude the 2019-20 regular season, and as well eventually have a Stanley Cup Playoffs and finals and award the Stanley Cup here, and then what's going to happen going forward in the off season, and as well how next season is going to be impacted here. Well, first, it still sounds like this whole situation keeps evolving here with this global pandemic here, but it almost sounds like again that the NHL wants to be committed to going back to hub cities here. I know there was some potential on having, going back to home NHL arenas all over here, but I think the NHL is still set on hub cities here, and I know there's various teams in the league here that are vying for having to host these host cities here. Definitely could be nice for having the hotels nearby. The NHL can buy, all the rooms or rent out the rooms for the teams here, that because they're still going to have to be in a bubble here. However, the one thing that could still be tricky here, but the NHL says they did factor this in, their requirements for quarantine or self-isolation here, is that obviously you get players who are playing all over the world here, and some players have gone overseas to back home into Europe here during this pause here, but eventually, let's just say, the NHL is thinking about potentially starting training facilities with teams at the end of May here, and I know the NHL wants to be more committed to having everyone happen at the same time here, so you don't have anyone who has more of an edge here who had more time to get team facilities in, and then obviously it still has to get approval from the governments and health authorities here. I know recently the province of Ontario allowed actually team facilities to train in that under restrictions there, because I know the NBA has slowly started doing that with their team facilities here, and I think Major League Baseball is still working on a couple things here, but it's getting their games in here. But it seems like with the NHL that it's going to be interesting to know how, let's say, like teams from the U.S., because it's almost like if, let's say, a few hub cities, because I know I hear that maybe a lot of these hub cities could be in Canada here, because I know that Edmonton and Vancouver definitely have put their bids in to be a host city here, and given where their arenas are, I know that the case with Edmonton here, they have a couple sheets of ice here, in the ice district from the Rogers Place, and they got another sheet of ice here, because it's irrelevant in a way where some of these games could be played here. I know the NHL says they want it to be in their NHL arenas here just because of the infrastructure, so they can have separate locker rooms, because these hub cities are going to host a bunch of teams, or at least a bunch of teams in the division, or I think they're still working that out here, but then have teams host in there, get their games in, and then eventually when it comes to the playoffs here, they can divvy up the teams that way for at least the first few rounds of the playoffs here. But then, if the arena's nearby and have hotels nearby, there's still a lot of, lots of intricacies to figure out about how they're going to test everybody. It has to be widespread testing so that, anyone on the street and professional athletes get the same access to the testing here. And then also the fact how they interact, playing or training. And also the fact that, because some of the players, and everyone has to be on board with the Players Association of the league here, but then the players are also hesitant in terms of, I'm going to be stuck in a bubble for 4 months here, away from families here, but, I think maybe they'll find some common ground, or maybe the families will be allowed to maybe go to the hub city, or maybe the team players will be allowed to, go back home, depending on where they are. They'll have to still work that out here, and, it also depends on, how the governments, especially between Canada and the U.S., in terms of the border here, or maybe they can, ease some rules where if they're doing technically conducting business, that could maybe, expedite a few things, given if they're under a lot of testing here. But it's still, I can still say encouraging to still hear that they're still committed to having, the season in the books, have a playoffs here. And I mean, next season will definitely start in December, and I think this is going to be the exception in this case of the NHL here. Still have a full season somehow, and then eventually a couple seasons later, maybe eventually get back into starting the season at the beginning of October, because I think that works best with the NHL here, and try to have the Stanley Cup awarded in the middle of June here, especially ice making. I know there's technology to keep them building school here, but let's just say I think it'd be kind of hilarious if it happened one year. It'd be very interesting, let's say, if Arizona and Florida ever met in the Stanley Cup final here in, the middle of June here. I'd be interested to see that, not only just for viewership, but fans, but let's just say, it's 30 degrees, both cities, where, it's at least dry in Arizona, but it's humid in Florida here. It'd be interesting how that works, but, that's why I think it'd be nice to still have it regular. This is the exception, but I know I talked about in my other video where I talked about MLB and the NBA, and I think it definitely work for the NBA if they consider possibly starting the season, just before Christmas time, so you can spread out the major leagues here. But it's definitely, I think, going to be exception here. I know that another effect that next season is going to be affected from this now is that the NHL, the last couple seasons, have had teams go overseas to Europe, like in Czech Republic, Sweden, Finland here, to play a couple of regular season games here. Well, that's scrapped for next season. A, for the travel restrictions, and B, usually those games start end of September, early October here. Well, maybe the way things are going, and this thing keeps evolving here, the Stanley Cup might be just rewarded then, and then have the compressed off season when it comes to free agency and making some off season trades, and then having a training camp to get ready for the next season whenever it starts in 2020-21 here. So when it comes to my game recaps, I haven't officially concluded season 2 yet, but it'll be interesting, because if the NHL comes back, and they're still hearing this June 1st date as when teams will have their full facilities here, and it's still not official yet, this is all speculative and it's always changing here, that there might be a few preseason games or exhibition games just so everyone gets back into game shape, then resume the play in July, and then start the playoffs in August and September here. But the other thing that the league seems to be set on now, which still is going to maybe rub a few general managers away, is that they want to have the draft next month in early June. Have it a little earlier than they originally scheduled here. It's going to be in the virtual format that the NFL did, but it's still going to be interesting how the heck they're going to figure out seeding when it comes to the draft here. And the other thing that definitely could rub a few teams the wrong way here is that what I'm hearing more about the NHL draft here. Of course, whenever the draft is, I'll make a video on recapping what the Flames ultimately did, and let's say any hitmen or any local players get drafted, which I've done in my previous draft recap videos when it comes to the Calgary Flames here. But let's just say if you're the Ottawa Senators or the Detroit Red Wings, the teams that were at the bottom of the league here, well, it sounds like what they're going to do with the draft lottery here, and I think I was still figuring it out or misunderstood it last week, that it was going to be a weighted lottery based on points percentage when it comes to where the teams were at when the pause button was pressed here. However, now it's going to kind of go back to the old system where only one team wins the lottery, and the one team that wins the lottery moves up 5 spots. And it's going to be weighted on points percentage from the pause, and it will be the teams that were outside of the playoff spot at the time here. However, if you're the Ottawa Senators or the Detroit Red Wings here, the Red Wings had the worst record at the point of the pause here, and they were already mathematically out of the playoffs here. And in the case of the Ottawa Senators here, they're going to have 2 first-round picks here because they have their own, and then they get one from the San Jose Sharks from the Erik Karlsson trade here. So potentially the Ottawa Senators maybe you could have the first and second round, or the first or third pick. But the worst case scenario is that those teams will only move down a spot. Let's say if any team wins the lottery. So gone are, if you just were in the, just on the cusp, but you just miss it, the best you can do is go from like 14 to 10th there. So it sounds like it's going to go back to that instead of the weighted lottery where you have multiple lotteries and where you could have 3 teams that could be in the top 3 and then they seed everyone else here. But the other thing that's just going to be still interesting that still needs to be figured out here is, I want to keep going back to the examples of some of these trades on conditional picks here, is that, well, for example, the New York Islanders, when they acquired Jean-Gabriel Pageau from the Ottawa Senators at the trade deadline here, that the Ottawa Senators could get a first-round pick from the New York Islanders if the New York Islanders were to win the Stanley Cup this year. But, well, the thing is, if this draft happens, at the beginning of June, and we haven't had the season concluded yet, and the Stanley Cup Playoffs started and awarded yet, well, the New York Islanders aren't going to know if they won the Stanley Cup to grant that team that first-round pick till then. And in the case of the Calgary Flames, well, we have a third-round pick that's in play in 2 trades here. Well, obviously with the Lucic for Neal deal, where we could get a third-round pick from the Edmonton Oilers if Neal gets 2 more goals and Lucic scores at least 10 or more goals away from James Neal, which I'd say just 2 more goals, James, and I think we would get that third-round pick if it happens. Well, the other trade is that the Eric Gustafsson trade that we got from the Chicago Blackhawks, they're going to get a third-round pick from us, but it's conditional on if it's our own or that pick that we could get from the Edmonton Oilers. It's whoever a third-round pick happens first here, so we're going to still have to iron out that, but it's going to be kind of a dull trade, or no, dull draft, because usually the excitement with the draft here is all the speculation on trades, and that's going to happen here. There isn't going to be any trades unless maybe they can make a provision. I wonder if let's say if the draft happens, at the beginning of June, it obviously won't be at the Bell Center in Montreal in the traditional format, and it's definitely too bad for those who are projected to go in the first round. They always dream about hearing their name called, getting hugs and kisses from their family, and always seeing their parents cry as they go up on the stage, greet Bettman and all the brass, and pull on their jersey and hat and pose. Unfortunately for them, that's going to not happen this season here. But getting back to the NHL draft here, I wonder if they'll still allow at least trading of picks. I think they should still at least allow that. Let's just say if there was a player that you were wanting at the draft, and you'd say, hey, team, do you want to swap picks, or do you want to move up? I want to move up, but we'll give you these picks so you can move down. I think those trades probably still might be allowed, where that would be the only trade you can make here, because you obviously can't trade. Actually, hypothetically, you could still make a trade after the trade deadline. It's just then that player is not eligible to play until the next season here. But I think everybody knows that here. But that's the only thing that could make the draft dull, is that you won't get these big speculative trades here, because but the only thing I'd be excited about, let's just say, well, obviously I want my hockey back, is having, playoffs in a non-traditional time here, but it's the off-season. It'd be definitely a compressed off-season. Let's say the Stanley Cup gets awarded in September, and then have a compressed off-season when it comes to free agency. Then all the trades can happen here. Who knows what the lost revenue here. It does sound like that the league is still committed to keeping the cap at where it is in the next couple seasons here, and I know the league also proposed having a cap where a couple years ahead of time so you can plan for it, instead of all of a sudden, you got to remember there's escrow too. If the cap were to go down here, the players' salaries will still get paid the same, but then they'll have to pay more into the league to keep it 50-50 here, and obviously all Major League Sports are going to be taking a hit here, because you're not going to get as much money, and obviously fans going to the game and buying tickets, merchandise, and concessions here. But the bigger leagues still have some TV revenue here. Obviously, I think the NHL, actually I heard that the NBA, for example, 40% of the revenue actually still comes from gates, which I actually find that a little surprising, because that tells me that's probably higher with the NHL here. But I know the NFL, they make a profit before swinging the gates open from their TV deals here. So at least these other major league sports, they can afford to play without fans for a while here. But obviously you can't say it forever. Hopefully this is just temporary for maybe a year until whenever, there's a proven treatment, at least a proven treatment and a vaccine before people are allowed to go to said stadiums and do their thing and support our teams or boo our enemies or, just, cheer our teams on here. But, it's just more updates with the NHL here. I mean, I still say it's encouraging to hear that everyone is still committed to having seasons, and it's under unusual circumstances. I think when it comes to the NHL here, the next couple seasons could still be affected a little. And so I think it's going to take a couple years for everything to get back to having the season start, first week of October, and then have the Stanley Cup awarded the middle of June, the latest here. Because I don't think it could work in the NBA to have maybe start season in December and then have the playoffs end in the summer, where the only thing going on is baseball here, and then you can still shift your focus a little more, where it gives more exposure to the other leagues, like the NFL, the NBA, MLB, and NHL here. Let's just say if the NBA moved its season to December here, because the NBA is already planning on starting next season in December here because of, all this happening right now, and the NHL is going to be starting potentially in December here, whenever, if they have games here. And I know some other YouTubers and hockey fans out there are almost thinking they should just cancel it here, but that's kind of the last resort here. I mean, especially when it comes to, we've been down this path a few times when it comes to lockouts here. But the only other thing you can also say with this, the league and the Players Association have to come to an agreement here is maybe they can start talking about the CBA, or at least expanding it for a couple more seasons. But I think the league and the Players Association seem to be a little more together than it was back then. Let's just say, 15 years ago when we had that lockout that wiped out that season, and I made that video and I said that was necessary. But these are just interesting times here. But what do you think about everything? More ideas on the NHL, hub cities. Do you think things going to be finished here? And what do you think about the draft here? I mean, it's definitely unusual circumstances here, but these are only takes some more updates on Major League Sports at least their plans on resuming here, and hopefully sooner rather than later. We'll talk about games again, recapping games, and just have something to watch in the summer here, because won't be any traveling this year anyway. So, as I say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, you know what you should do. Just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I mostly talk Calgary and sports on my channel here, but I also do personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also share my experiences when I'm on the road or at a sporting event here, back when we were allowed to do those kind of things. Remember that? That seemed like a long time ago, but something we'll ever get through this, and we'll talk about games again, and maybe soon enough we'll be allowed to go to games here. But that's all I post to my channel here, so if that sounds like it'd be interesting to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, you know what you should do. I also have my other social media links down in the description below there, where I will post, maybe some material there, or give hints on future content that I would plan to make on my channel here. So I'll say here, go Flames go, and just keep making these update videos just so I can keep producing content here, and it's at least better than me making videos on things potentially being canceled here. I know there's one league in particular that I'm planning on making a video talking about that. But in the meantime, as I'll say, I'll see you in the next video here.